In 1925, the city of Miami built a municipal waste incinerator in the segregated Jim Crow neighborhood of the West Grove. From 1926 to 1970, the city operated the incinerator located at 3425 Jefferson Street, Coconut Grove, Florida, a predominantly Bahamian American settlement. Called Old Smokey due to the excessive amounts of smoke and ash it produced, the incinerator was permanently closed as a public nuisance by court order in 1970. For 44 years, the West Grove endured the burdens of a life in the shadows of Old Smokey's ash. This is the story of the West Grove and Old Smokey. Bahamian immigrants settled Coconut Grove in 1821 and officially established the community in 1873. The village of Coconut Grove is one of the oldest communities in South Florida. Due to geographic isolation, Coconut Grove was sparsely settled and primarily agricultural for most of the 19th century. Over time, waves of Bahamian immigrants began to take root in Coconut Grove, purchasing land and building homes along Charles Avenue that eventually formed the first black settlement in Miami. Accounts from the period suggest that the Bahamian settlers' intimate knowledge of tropical farming techniques of the region's harsh limestone soil were crucial to the survival of early settlers from the north. It is believed that the lack of explicit racial antagonism was due to several factors, such as mutual dependency on survival in a new frontier town, limited external influence, and the migration of northern white settlers.
Well, the earliest conversations I've had with anyone, they called it the land across from the light, because the lighthouse was on the tip of Key Biscayne, where it still is. And the early lighthouse tenders, many of them were from the Bahamas. And they wanted to have a little more of a family feeling, so they actually kind of squatted originally on the land across from the light, because there's a channel that goes from Key Biscayne into Coconut Grove. So the earliest families were the Pints and the Frows, both of which are directly connected to the Bahamas.
White and black residents of Coconut Grove intermingled at the community's sole church, the Union Congregational Church.
It was a very liberal community church, and the blacks and whites worshiped together at that church, which was unheard of, and even in South Florida, anywhere else.
The Grove's first hotel, the Peacock Inn, employed and housed blacks on their premises.
The Peacocks went to Key West, which was the big city for South Florida at the time. They went to Key West to find some people to help work at the inn, because there weren't very many people living in Miami. You know, you're talking about 50. You're talking a very small number of people living in South Florida. So the first woman to come was named Mariah Brown. And she was a black Bahamian woman. And she came to work at the inn. And she became very much involved in bringing her cousins primarily. So all of the earliest families were all, black families, were all from the Bahamas, most of which were related to each other. And Mariah Brown then built the first house on Charles Avenue.
Jim Crow segregation laws, beginning as early as 1865, began to divide the Grove by race. By 1921, the Coconut Grove community was divided, and the racially segregated neighborhood where black residents were confined by law constituted the West Grove. This densely populated area stretched from US 1 to McDonald Avenue and continued south to Franklin Avenue. Similar to Coconut Grove, the neighboring city of Coral Gables segregated its black residents into the East Gables, also known as the Black Gables. With slum conditions rampant throughout the segregated West Grove, the residents suffered countless hardships and injustices. Because of racist city and county ordinances, segregated communities were denied access to public water and sewage systems. The segregation of access to water left the community without indoor plumbing or municipal drinking water long after surrounding white areas were provided such services. In the 1950 article, Coconut Grove, Florida Faces Its Slums, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas recounted life in the West Grove during segregation. Colored Town used the same wells, the water of which was contaminated. There was running water only in a few of the buildings. Bathing facilities were the same tap on the back porch or a one-pitcher pump in the yard. With the great increase in population in the whole Miami area, Coconut Grove, Colored Town, too, grew crowded. The same little old frame houses stood as they always had, sagging and run down. But now other houses, shacks, flimsy board or cement double houses, were jammed in backyards, often completely filling narrow 25-foot lots. Flies bred in the open privies, rats and mosquitoes bred in the trash and garbage and infested the houses, of which more than 70% had defective screens or none at all. As the city of Miami grew, so too did the need for effective waste management practices. Early attempts to address this need included ocean dumping and landfilling, both viewed as practical and logistical failures. In the 1920s, the city began to experiment with the increasingly popular practice of waste incineration. Why did the city of Miami construct and operate Old Smokey in the middle of a Jim Crow segregated residential neighborhood? Was it because the public land was available and inexpensive? Was it because the community was disenfranchised and thus powerless to stop it? Were the city and county acting in a racially motivated way?
There may very well have been a trend towards placing these environmental bads in poor minority neighborhoods.
I think it was land they figured they could use and wouldn't nobody object to it.
Several yards away from Old Smokey stood segregated schools. And mere feet from Old Smokey stood homes and churches occupied by West Grove residents.
I lived right in front of the city barn there on the corner of Washington Avenue and Brooker Street. What comes to mind is seeing the garbage truck coming down Washington Avenue and going around what is now called the barnyard, and they had a weighing station. There was a platform that the truck would drive up on, and they would weigh the truck, and then it would go to the back of the barnyard.
They used to drive up the hill and dump the garbage into the hole.
That's where the garbage trucks would come through and dump their stuff, and that's when Old Smokey go to smoking.
It would dump all this ashes into the sky, and it would end up everywhere.
Now, could you imagine in a community where they're burning garbage? Could you imagine the smell? It was my.
You could not escape the smell.
Old Smokey initially operated day and night, burning 100 tons of the city's waste each day.
That thing would run early in the morning, late in the evening. Trucks. 100 trucks coming and dropping that mess off.
Our buses lined up on the side where Old Smokey is, and we had to stand out there and wait for the bus to come. And if they were still burning at that time, it was horrible. Sometimes we go sit in the gym until it was time for the bus to come.
As early as 1941, newspaper articles reported strong community opposition to the incinerator. It was viewed as an unsightly mess and in constant need of repair.
And them poor people that live down there on Washington, I mean, they caught the blues. They got it all. They got the smell, the fumes, the maggots, and everything else around there, you know. It was just terrible around there.
Additionally, in 1949, the city of Miami's own Planning and Zoning Board found the incinerator to be a public nuisance that greatly detracted from the quality of life of West Grove residents. Despite this acknowledgement from the city's Planning and Zoning Board, and a common disdain among West Grove residents of Old Smokey's existence in their community, operations continued. In the late 1950s, Miami began acquiring funds for an eventual expansion of the facility that would nearly triple Old Smokey's garbage burning capacity. The city proposed a plan to rebuild and renovate Old Smokey into a smokeless and odorless incinerator using the latest technology at the time. Residents throughout Coconut Grove requested that the incinerator site be developed into a park for the children of the West Grove, and vigorously opposed any other plan. As fate would have it, residents received neither the park they desired nor the state-of-the-art incinerator they were promised. Against their wishes, the residents were forced to endure a new, larger incinerator within their community. Smoke and ash continued to billow from the facility day and night at concentrations 3 to 5 times the allowable limit under the Dade County Pollution Control Ordinance, leaving it far from odorless or smokeless as promised.
Many operators just didn't care about the environment. They didn't care about public health, right? They just ran their incinerators as inexpensively as possible, and let the neighborhoods or let the communities just deal with the public health effects of the operation of their incinerators. Even probably for the times they were managed in dangerous ways.
The smoke and ash that spewed from Old Smokey blanketed a community with few, if any, forms of recourse, effectively rendering the residents of the West Grove helpless in their struggle to improve environmental quality in their neighborhood.
The incinerator was an ingrown thing in the community. We all knew it was there and we all hated it, and realized when it was being used, it was something we would have to suffer.
The rebuilt Old Smokey reportedly operated 6 days a week for 16 hours a day, with Monday being the heaviest day to make up for Sunday's lack of operation. Because most Grove residents lived, worked, and attended school in the West Grove, they rarely escaped the smell, smoke, and ash of Old Smokey.
It smelled like old rotten, rotten food, and I don't know, it just had a bad odor, very bad odor.
All our sports that we had to do was right there at Carver on the field, right there. They had the field house there, and we played basketball, football, tennis.
Our teachers wouldn't even want us to be out there in it. Even when it wasn't burning, it still had, the odor was still there. And we knew it, but it was a way of life. What were we going to do? We had to go to school.
So Smokey was on the east side, and we was on the west side. And when you see that smoke coming out, you knew then it was time for us to try to cover up.
With an estimated 1 ton of smoke and ash spewing from Old Smokey's stack each day, the West Grove quickly garnered comparisons to heavily polluted and industrialized cities like Pittsburgh and Chicago. In fact, newspaper accounts from the 1960s reported instances where the smoke from the incinerator was so thick that it obstructed airplanes flying into Miami International Airport, requiring them to resort to instrument landings.
Where else was they gonna put it but in the black neighborhood?
Soon after Old Smokey expanded in 1961, Coral Gables residents also began to experience the burdens that residents of the West Grove had been forced to endure for the previous 35 years. However, as Coral Gables residents began to complain of ash and soot dirtying their pools and roofs, their city officials responded, threatening to seek legal action against the city of Miami to close the incinerator.
They was complaining, about Old Smokey, Lord, that smoke going over people's houses over in Coral Gables.
That's when the balls started rolling. See, some of their houses caught fire. Then the smell was endurance for them over there. Now we in right in the center of it.
The people on Granada and in that section of Coral Gables were getting the deposit of the soot and fly ash from Old Smokey that would blacken their roofs.
The court in this case stated that it would not stand idly by while the citizens of Coral Gables were required to endure the existence of a nuisance. However, by the time the court made its statement in support of the residents of Coral Gables, the West Grove had endured the nuisance of Old Smokey for over 40 years. Their voice had never been heard. The legal battle reached its climax when the issue of Old Smokey's permanent closure came before State Court Judge Raymond Nathan.
I was very aware of the suit in front of Judge Nathan, and at the time we played tennis, I knew as an attorney that it would be inappropriate for me to say anything about the pending litigation, but my wife wasn't aware of that.
And I said, I would like you to spend 1 day or 1 hour over at Carver and tell me what you think about the incinerator.
She said to him, get your ass out of the courthouse and go down there and take a look at what's happening at Carver.
The streets were dirty, everything over there because of the incinerator, and it wasn't kept up.
And sure enough, it reported in the paper that he adjourned the hearing in the courthouse, and he and the attorneys all went to Old Smokey, took a look at it, and according to the paper, he signed the order on the spot to close down Old Smokey, and it never spewed fly ash or smell after that ever again.
The impact of a growing environmental movement in America proved influential in Judge Nathan's decision-making process when he granted the injunction that triggered the closure of Old Smokey. 1970 was not only significant in the West Grove, but was also significant for the environmental law movement in the United States. That year, President Nixon signed the landmark amendments to the Clean Air Act and established the EPA.
Well, EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, its specific role is actually more of oversight, right? So it's the states and localities that are primarily responsible for managing such environmental bads as air, water pollution, waste management.
The demise of Old Smokey triggered a sequence of events that would forever change waste management practices in Miami-Dade County. In 1969, just prior to the closure of Old Smokey, the EPA estimated that 4 municipal incinerators combined to dispose 1/3 of the county's waste. However, by 1975, all but one of these incinerators was shut down due to non-compliance with federal, state, and local air pollution regulations.
The major incinerator was the one on 20th Street, and that was just a few blocks north of Jackson Hospital. So that to me proves more than anything, they didn't have a clue about how toxic and how the ash and the waste product of incinerator, how horrible it was, that you would have put it right by the hospital where the patrons with no air conditioning, with the windows open, would be breathing in the incinerator smoke.
The early signs of an environmental justice movement began in the 1960s and 70s. when low-income and minority communities began organizing and collectively opposing pollution and industry intentionally placed in their neighborhoods. On February 11, 1994, President Bill Clinton signed Executive Order 12898. The executive order was a groundbreaking achievement for the environmental justice movement, as it directed federal agencies to identify and address the disproportionately onerous adverse health or environmental effects of their policies or programs on low-income and minority communities. It also directed federal agencies to look for ways to prevent discrimination by race in any federally funded programs dealing with health or the environment. For 41 years, no remediation or environmental assessments were performed at the Fire Training Center site. In 2011, environmental testing of the soil at the Fire Training Center site revealed concentrations of toxic heavy metals that exceeded the county's safety thresholds.
They still got the park open and they still utilizing it. So they're not afraid that them kids that go out to that park, on that park every day, they're not afraid that they might get, cancer. I think they should close it down until they resolve the problem.
The presence of ash in many of the soil samples, combined with the fact that the site was never remediated in the 41 years after Old Smokey closed, suggests the incinerator is the likely source. In 2013, at the request of county regulators, the City of Miami expanded soil testing throughout the site. The results of this and subsequent reports have confirmed the initial finding that levels of arsenic, lead, benzopyrene, and other toxic heavy metals exceed health safety exposure thresholds for residential areas. Exposure to substances such as arsenic and benzopyrene have been linked to several types of cancer, while lead exposure is especially dangerous for children, as it causes developmental delays and learning difficulties.
You can say that from an environmental perspective, the next step is to say, well, you need to remediate that. You need to get to the point where subsequent testing reveals no red zone levels. That's not the end of the story. That in no way, shape, or form deals with, has 80, 90 years of a community potentially being exposed chronically to low levels, or maybe not so low levels, of substances known to be associated with disease, whether it's really had an impact on the community.
As awareness of the incinerator's lasting impact on the West Grove grew, so too did the concerns of residents and parents of the approximately 1,000 children who attend school and play every day in the area immediately surrounding the site.
Well, I think a remedy would be for them to complete the needed tests that are being asked of them to complete. And I think that there should be something gone back to see about the health status of those people that lived in the area and that were involved in the area.
If you say, well, we'll assess everybody in this community, and you find that, gee, everybody in that community is healthy. If you didn't necessarily say, well, who lived in that community and died prematurely, you'll have what we call informative censoring. And that's where potentially those that were the most affected are not part of the assessment that you did.
Subsequent tests of the soil at various locations within a 1-mile radius of the former incinerator revealed high levels of toxic contaminants at Coconut Grove parks once used as ash dumps. As a result, 2 parks, Blanche and Merry Christmas, were promptly closed.
And it was easy to fill in a rock pit with waste and garbage and whatever, anything you could throw in the rock pit to fill it up. And so many of the parks in Miami-Dade County were either, some of them were abandoned military land, like the Dinner Key Naval Air Station, which obviously had aviation fuel dumped in the ground. Chapman Field, that's a new one that just popped up. So it certainly wasn't done with any bad intention, it was done from ignorance. And now, this many years later, it's amazing they're finally figuring it out, and hopefully, I hope a lot of people haven't died in the meantime from, probably some have, but especially children who played in these parks, including my children at Carver. It's a terrible thought.
And it's really important to respect concerns of a community, because oftentimes you do the science and it actually confirms the suspicions of people in the community. Oftentimes, people in the community will say, 4 members of my family, had heart disease or cancer or lung disease before they were 30, and they didn't live past 50.
My mom died from pancreatic cancer about years ago, about 28 years ago.
Well, one sister, she had asthma since she was a little girl. Real bad asthmatic, but she died of lung cancer. Then my mom died of pancreatic cancer. My brother died of esophagus cancer.
Because at the end of the day, why you're really trying to do this is to do the right thing for the community, people that have lived there that really had no say or no knowledge that they were being exposed to environmental toxins that may or may not affect their health.
Amid concerns about soil contamination and potential health effects, the county requested the city to review historical records for all 112 city parks. As of June 2014, this study has revealed 5 additional parks contaminated with solid waste and incinerator ash. As of June 2014, the Florida Department of Health has conducted a public health assessment for Blanche Park and has stated its plans to conduct another at Merry Christmas Park. However, the department has no plans to conduct similar evaluations of the fire training center site and the area immediately surrounding it, despite repeated requests by residents.
And I heard they were up there to Blanche Park and Merry Christmas Park, and I say, well, what about us? We were right under Old Smokey. Why are they going that far and this late in the game to look for arsenic,
In fact, residents of the East and West Grove formed an informal organization of interested community stakeholders to create the Old Smokey Steering Committee. This committee began meeting in the fall of 2013 and continues to work toward its mission to ensure comprehensive site testing, remediation, the creation of a disease registry, and the right to know through open communication with local elected officials and government agencies.
History repeats itself. They put Old Smokey in there in a time when nobody was aware of what was happening and what the causes and effect was going to be further down the line. Now they're trying to put this trolley thing in Coconut Grove, right there on Douglas Road. The fumes, the oil, and all that stuff. This is a Car Gable trolley. Why are they putting that in Coconut Grove?
I think they owe more than an apology. Ethically and spiritually, they need to come together and do something for that community.
Because at the end of the day, it's not about blame. It's about, does this have a consequence to a community's health of perhaps people who may no longer be alive, people who are currently alive, and the next generation that may come out of people who are living in these communities.
Hopefully it will cast light on the administrations and governments around here to realize that this was something wrong and that shouldn't have been done, and to address it and hopefully not hide from it, do something about it, clean it up.